Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to warmly welcome you to this year's Berlin Demography Days, as well as the online guests on the topic under the theme Demography and Democracy, on behalf of the organizers. The Berlin Demography Days are an international conference series that has been held since 2012, for more than 12 years now, formerly known as the Berlin Demography Forum. Each year, the Berlin Demography Days bring together interested parties, experts and decision makers from politics, society, business and academia in Germany, Europe and worldwide to discuss current and policy-relevant questions of demographic change. Demography and democracy, both words share the Greek root demos. While in demography we focus on changes in the size and composition of the population, while in democracy we focus on the people's rule. But the two are closely connected. We need to know how the demos, whose interests our democratic institutions are meant to safeguard and defend, is composed in terms of factors such as age, health and life expectancy, family status and gender, income and wealth, education and access to the labor market, place of residence and origin. And we must also understand how this composition will change in the coming decades. Demographic conditions influence people's most immediate living environments, in their families, the places they live, and their workplaces, as well as their most fundamental life interests, such as education, social cohesion, health, prosperity, and security, and with that, their overall satisfaction and well-being. It is certainly no exaggeration to say that most policy areas are directly or indirectly affected by population trends. In other words, by the demos itself. For the sake of brevity, I will highlight just 3 examples. My first example: when people lament that younger individuals cannot assert their interests against the growing group of older people, what's being addressed is the age composition of the population. Of course, we know that age groups can themselves be very diverse internally. Demographic factors play a role in solving many of the future issues that affect the next generations. Just think of the future of the pension system, of healthcare, or of the labor market. When the last large birth cohorts of the baby boomers reach retirement age in the next few decades, and the shortage of skilled labor becomes ever more pressing. My second example: if we considered how to ensure that essential public services remain equivalent for everyone, no matter where they live, then we are talking about regional demographics, changing family structures, the timing and scale of people moving into and out of regions, and the value creation that regions, cities and municipalities derive from these movements or stand to lose. How can we improve living conditions in regions where the population is shrinking? Which expectations are realistic and which will not be achievable in light of demographic trends? Here, demography provides important knowledge for planning. My third example concerns the shortage of skilled workers, and with it, the topic of migration. We need to understand how the composition of the population is changing with respect to age, origin, educational background, and labor market access, and how we can create fair opportunities for everyone, so that integration and participation can succeed. Granted, this process may take some time. But now it is more important than ever to make clear that migration and mobility have never been the exception in history, but always the norm in population development. This is true especially now, when demographic change is about to confront us with full force in the next 2 decades. Nevertheless, we must not close our eyes to the fears that many people have. For example, the fear of losing what they consider essential to their own lives. No matter how justified one may deem such fears, they do exist, and we have to find an answer to them. As a network concerned with demography, we therefore want to work more closely with the humanities and social sciences and also find ways to better reach those who have so far remained outside of our reach. As researchers, we have by now grown accustomed to thinking beyond silos, that is, working more closely with practitioners and creating new knowledge together. But perhaps we need to learn even more to make an impact outside of our own bubble. In other words, we must reach those who do not share our knowledge, who do not share our opinions, and who do not use our usual communication channels. We are especially pleased about this year's collaboration between the Berlin Demography Days and the European Commission-funded project WeID, Identities, Migration, Democracy. The coordinator of this project, Claudia Neu, is here with us today. We are delighted to be part of this project, which will, over the next few years, engage intensively with many of the questions being discussed today, uncover the narratives surrounding them, and develop possible responses. This means that today's and tomorrow's event is not a one-off occurrence. You will continue to hear from us on the topic of demography and democracy in the future. And we have extremely exciting discussions ahead of us today and tomorrow. Allow me to say a word of thanks at this point. First and foremost, I would like to thank the experts from academia and practice who are contributing their knowledge, experience and practical examples in today's workshops on the panel and in the international segment of the event tomorrow, and who are putting all this up for discussion. In particular, I also wish to thank our three keynote speakers, Claudia Neu from University of Göttingen, Stefan Liebig from the Free University of Berlin, and Katharina Spieß from the Federal Institute for Population Research. Without them, of these experts, the success of these events would not be possible. This also includes the participants of today's panel, whom our moderator, Shelley Kupferberg, will introduce to you shortly. I would like to extend my sincere thanks also to Shalini, Randeria and Jasmin Arbabian-Vogel for agreeing to participate in today's panel discussion. State Secretary Petra Bar, unfortunately, had to cancel at short notice due to illness. We are grateful that Dr. Sven-Olaf Obst, head of the Department Intergenerational Equity, Youth, Older People at the Federal Ministry for Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth, has agreed to represent the political side on the panel. We are very happy to have you with us today. I would especially like to thank our long-standing cooperation partner in organizing the Berlin Demography Days, the Federal Institute for Population Research, BIB. In preparing for this event, Esther Doppheide, Leonie Schraub and Dr. Katja Passwald provided us with invaluable support. I want to sincerely thank each of them here as well. Next, I want to thank the sponsors of the Berlin Demography Days. First and foremost, this includes the Federal Ministry of the Interior, the Federal Ministry for Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth, as well as the Federal Ministry of Health. These ministries have been successfully supporting this international event format for many years. Thanks to their support, we have been able to cover a whole range of important societal topics, such as the situation of young people, the resilience of their population in times of crisis, migration, and much more. I would also like to thank the European Commission, which is funding the WeID project under the Horizon Europe. Commissioner Dubravka Šuica, who has been mentioned already, whose portfolio includes demographic issues. And she will greet you herself in her video message in just a moment. I'm almost through. Furthermore, my thanks go to the Max Planck Society, which has provided us with this venue today, and the Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research, which hosts the Secretariat of Population Europe. We are a network of 41 leading research institutes from all across Europe, dedicated to policy dialogue and advising decision makers in the field of demographic change. We are pleased that the director of the Max Planck Institute, Emilio Zagheni, is with us today. Later, in his capacity as president of the European Association for Population Studies, also a partner of the Berlin Demography Days, he will speak to you and introduce this year's winners of the prestigious European Demographer Awards, whom I would also like to warmly welcome. Finally, I wish to thank the members of the advisory board of the Berlin Demography Days, who have been actively supporting us for years in selecting topics and shaping the event. They are unfortunately too numerous for me to thank each one individually, but I hope that each of them feels personally addressed. The chair of the advisory board, former Federal Minister Hermann Gröhe, would have liked to speak to you himself tonight, but for personal reasons he was unfortunately unable to come at short notice. He has asked me to convey his greetings to all of you and to extend a warm welcome on his behalf. Last but not least, I want to thank those who made today's event possible in the first place and who prepared it. First and foremost, my colleagues, Dr. Leon Rossmeyer and Charlotte Sinn, who you saw at the entrance, then Öndercan Muti and Peter Weissenburger, as well as Martin Torkler and his team from MTL, who also assisted us in this morning, and they will ensure the event technology runs smoothly for us today, and Johannes Hampel and Bettina von Arps-Aubert, who are making us understandable to all participants through the simultaneous interpreting. I think the preparation team, working behind the scenes, without whom we wouldn't be here today, and without whom nothing would really run, deserves a round of applause.
Dear participants, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for inviting me to address you today. I'm delighted with the theme of the 2025 edition of the Berlin Demography Days, Demography and Democracy. The two indeed go hand in hand. As you may know, I had the privilege to be in charge of exactly this portfolio in the previous European Commission. And it is a pleasure to continue the demography part alongside the Mediterranean portfolio, which also has a considerable demography component. I'm glad that I can continue to count on a vibrant research community across Europe. Many of you are present today. Let me extend my heartfelt congratulations to the three winners of the European Demographer Award 2024, Eva Boschua, Cosmo Strozza, and Julia Hellstrand. Demographic changes such as an aging population, urbanization, the depopulation of rural areas, or migration can have a considerable impact on the functioning of democratic systems. One example is housing. Many economies rely on attracting international talent to help fill the labor shortage gaps they cannot fill domestically. We must ensure that local residents, young people, families, and older people can still afford housing. At the same time, we must prevent discrimination in the access to housing for legal labor migrants. Demographic trends can also affect the legitimacy of democratic institutions.
If politicians fail to overcome the challenges posed by demographic change, among other things, this could jeopardize the acceptance of democracy as a whole. This is also confirmed by current figures from election research in Germany.
We need to make sure that we keep the trust of our citizens in the democratic system. This is a joint responsibility for all levels of government. At the European Commission, we have developed a demography toolbox with recommendations for policy measures, and we are now implementing it. Reconciling family aspirations and paid work or healthy aging are just two examples. And still this year, we will present an affordable housing plan and a legal initiative on short-term rentals. We are glad that many member states already have measures in place related to demography or are in the process of designing reforms. I know they will count on the support of the experts gathered today in Berlin as they are doing this. Responding to the challenges of demography can help revitalize democracy. I am grateful for your expertise and for your dedication in this undertaking.
Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you an interesting and inspiring discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dubravka Šupsa, and good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming here. Thank you for attending this opening evening. A warm welcome to all of you. I'm Shelley Kupferberg. I'm a free journalist, author, and moderator, and I'm happy to share a few thoughts with you, thoughts that have already been briefly mentioned here in the words of welcome. We have a panel of experts. I'm really looking forward to it. And I was just thinking, when I was driving here, I passed the Museum of Communication. And for a long time, there was a banner that said, "Why don't we do what we know?" Very simple sentence, but a very true statement, a very true question. And if I ask you, or if I listen to academic and listen to what is already known, then I sometimes ask myself, how long does it take for political debates to become and be shaped constructively and kicked off so that we eventually also see pleasant developments in the area of demography, very acute and burning issues that we would like to discuss tonight. Not just here on the panel, this is not a one-way road. You, dear audience, can also participate, also online. You can ask questions, and I think we have a roving mic here. Yeah, wonderful. So you can ask questions directly also if you attend the event online. So that has already been said. I would like to thank the interpreters. Applause to the interpreters way back there in the booth. And now, Katharina Spieß, I would like to ask you to join me on stage, Director of the Federal Institute for Population Research, BIB. Good evening. Jasmin Arbabian-Vogel, she's an entrepreneur in the care sector. For many years, has a lot of expertise. Welcome, good evening. I'm very happy that online from Sri Lanka, Shalini Randeria will be attending our event. It is night in Sri Lanka. Thank you so much, Ms. Randeria, for participating tonight. We try to connect with her. I hope she will be seen on the screen now. And we also have Dr. Sven-Olaf Obst. He is the head of Department 6, which doesn't tell us anything, but you do know what Department 6 is. It is intergenerational justice, youth and elderly people in the Federal Ministry for Education, Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth. So, Ms. Randeria, I hope that she is now being connected. We have headsets should you need simultaneous interpretation. So, I would like to kick off our discussion by picking up a few aspects that we have already heard about. Demography and democracy and the connection between the two. Dear Ms. Spieß, give us a few further or more aspects that are important when it comes to the connection between the two. Yes, with great pleasure. Let me start with an aspect that we discussed this morning in one of our fora. And I kicked off this forum by sharing a hypothesis that says democracy and democracy are very important when it comes to education. Why am I saying this? If we take a look at demographic change and if we want to master it, then we have heard a lot that it's about heads, about minds, about people who come to us and also leave Germany again. But it's also about what is in the heads of people. How do we master the lack of skilled labor by providing more education? How do we master the demographic challenges with regards to all the dimensions that we are going to discuss today? Education is what it comes down to at the end of the day. And when it comes to democracy, the same applies. Education is very important. The acceptance of democracy, democratic institutions, and acceptance of migrants, for instance, all of that has a lot to do with education. And this is a very good example that shows how these two subjects are closely intertwined. And if you ask me later what should be done, then I can tell you, let's invest in education, because this is good both for demographic change and for democracy. We serve the two. Yeah, I have heard this multiple times in the past. This is definitely something that we have often heard in many different speeches. But we have Mr. Obst here. He is a representative of the Federal Ministry. Poor Mr. Obst. Well, no, but seriously, you represent the Federal Ministry of Education, Family Affairs and Youth, and you have triggered specific measures when it comes to investing in education. Employers can also invest in education. So I do not just address your ministry, Mr. Obst, but I also address many, many other stakeholders. So, Ms. Spieß, let me introduce her. In the context of her research is population, family, economic-related affairs, and she's a member in different research organizations and expert groups. Amongst others, she's also a member of the advisory board for family affairs in your ministry, or the family ministry. And she also has a professorship at the Gutenberg University in Mainz. I would like to ask the same question to Jasmin Arbabian-Vogel. Many years ago, in 1996, she set up an intercultural care company, which then spread and expanded a lot in the last years. And she, when it comes to the practical implementation, is an absolute expert. So why should we focus on the connection between demography and democracy much more? Well, the debates of the last weeks and months have shown that this is something that we have to face. Our reality is that we are confronted with democracy and demography-related questions basically every day. And I would like to do it like Ms. Spieß. I would like to boil it down to a hypothesis, a main hypothesis. So, based on my gut feeling, democracy is basically what people perceive as democratic, if their life works. Democracy is if my life works. That's a good sentence, actually. And the task that we have is to ask, how can we manage to make sure that the life of people living in Germany works? And of course, it comes down to the provision of services of general interest. I came from Berlin to Hanover. You can imagine which means of transport I used. Of course, the train. So this is also an issue. So all of these things basically show whether our lives are working or not. And to expand the topic a bit more, I would like to highlight three very important points, because these are aspects that are relevant to my staff, to the team that I work with on an everyday basis. The first one is, do I feel like a member of the society? Does my life work as a member of a society that I belong to? The second important point is, do I have enough safety? Do I feel secure and safe enough? So my feeling for safety and security, which, by the way, is defined differently by people, we normally label it as, am I safe on the train station? But safety and security is much, much more, encompasses much more. That's the second important issue. And the third one, which is crucial, especially for those who go to work every day, do I feel self-efficacy? So what I do, does it have an effect? Does it make a difference? And in these 3 points, I mean, if some things don't work that well in these 3 points anymore, then it has an impact on our life, on how we feel, and on how we assess democracy. Or, let me put it differently, a bit more prominently, we often hear from people, democracy is no longer working. And then you ask them, why is it no longer working? How come that you're saying this? Then we often hear, well, the bakery is no longer open, the bus doesn't go anymore, I don't know how to fund my care services. And the problem, as we have also heard from Brussels, the problem with rents. I'm confronted with my rental issue every day, people say, and if I, as an employee, work overtime, then I will notice at some point that my efficacy is limited, because working more does not automatically mean that I have more money in my wallet. And all these aspects that I have just mentioned in a nutshell make me subjectively feel insecure when I ask myself, does my life really work as it should work? Important points, belonging, safety, security, self-efficacy, and your perception does not have to correspond to the numbers out there, but I'm sure that we will come back to this. So Shalini, Randeria, it is wonderful to see you. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. It's so late in Sri Lanka. Thank you for staying up for us. It is really an honor for us. I have briefly introduced you already. She's the president of the Central European University. What would you say? What is the connection between current demographic challenges and the loss of trust in democratic institutions? And what have you found in your research activities? Thank you very much. I hope that you can see and hear me. So let me start with 3 brief aspects, and then we can delve into the details and figure out which ones are good for a discussion. The first important point that we need to understand is this: demographic fears that people have, and that are not just fueled by right-wing parties, but that have become also part of the everyday discourse of mainstream parties. So demographic fears and panic that population size is shrinking, the birth rate is going down. That is a real fact, that is reality, but it leads to 2 very problematic developments. The first one is this: there is an anti-migration policy which is pursued, and on the other hand, it is an anti-woman policy that is pursued. So women are blamed. Only women are blamed, which is totally absurd, for reducing birth rates. And secondly, the LGBTIQ community is also blamed because these are the 2 groups that allegedly do not reproduce the nation as deems ideal. The ideal concept is, of course, a nostalgic one, and it is also an allegedly ethnically clean society. Yeah, it is totally wrong. So it denies, and this is my second point, it denies and refuses the acceptance of the necessity of migration. Brutalist policy, like it is being pursued all over the planet in many different countries, Southeast Asia, Japan, China, South Korea, but also in the US under President Trump, Eastern Europe, Western Europe also actually. Macron last year talked about demographic rearmament. So the wording and the language has already changed and has also changed, which is very problematic because it equalizes women with weapons. But okay, let's push this aside for a second. The question is, the demographic question is always connected to the population that is allegedly there, which is entitled to a certain territory. Everybody else is stranger and does not belong to this very nation. So this type of demographic discourse and panic damages the democracy, damages the democratic institutions, because they refuse certain facts. They refuse and deny the acceptance of the fact that migration is necessary. So people do not always have children. It is not something that is automatically accepted. And then in many European countries, Eastern European countries, we have the brain drain. Many well-educated people in Eastern Europe leave their countries. But it's not just young people, but also well-educated people that leave their Eastern European countries. And that is also a huge loss for democracies, because the rest of the population is much more susceptible. In Hungary, for instance, in Poland, in Romania, in Bulgaria. So the voting patterns there have very clearly shown that rural and aging populations are much more susceptible for such propaganda. That said, we have multiple connections and intertwinements of demographic change and issues of liberal democracy and its future.
So many important points that you have mentioned. Let's look at politics, Mr. Obst. These are all things that are certainly being discussed also in the political landscape for many years, have been discussed in Germany in view of more and more exacerbated splits inside the society. How can we increase social cohesion? You hear it again and again. What's your take on the impact of demographic change, and how, in what terms do you discuss it? For example, inside your ministry, Professor Spieß. Well, we noticed that we have known each other for a long time, 25 years. Well, basically, we have been discussing this topic of demographic change for a equally long time. In such appointments, I see a déjà vu experience. Such an experience happens in a society, especially in the highly industrialized countries. But in the nearer future, probably almost the entire planet will be engulfed by this change. The perception of demographic change is a highly subjective affair. You look around. Our hall is crammed full. What's the problem? Certain mayors, both male and female, would say, what's the problem? I don't have a problem. But all of a sudden you see empty houses. Then all of a sudden you realize there are not enough people in your town. So it's a long-term affair, tackling the demographic change. I think this can be also taken into parallel with death tables and also pension calculations, where you see changes over the course of 25 or 30 years. If people had noticed this, even in the past, it would have been about time to tackle this even 25 or 30 years ago. But this hasn't happened. Many tools have been used everywhere. Japan, we have a very intense exchange of views with Japan, so many common meetings. We traveled to places in Japan that are abandoned totally because no one wants to live any longer, or the last people standing are dying away. Japan has a totally different concept about tackling demographic change. There is no silver bullet to solve this problem. Well, one important approach would be to face up to this question: how do we reproduce ourselves in society? How can we create an encouraging mood so that people feel prompted to become parents? Because children are the future. They will be carrying us on their shoulders in the future. We are all in the same boat. Well, on one end, you have the parents. On the other end of the boat, you have the children. But it's the same boat. How can we encourage people to beget children in this world, in this society, with all the challenges that come along with it? On the other hand, we also know that this rate of 2.1 children per woman, well, this sustaining rate of children is a vision, but it's not reality. So previously it was a pyramid, now it's a pillar. Thanks to the baby boomers, we have a bulge in the middle. Well, the first cohorts of the baby boomers are dying away. Not so. We are slowly sliding into this changing landscape, and we will also migrate outside of this bulge as time goes by. Well, we need to face up to it in the future. This society will be sustained by few shoulders. But how can we strengthen the society and especially economy so that these loads or these burdens, well, I use this term quite consciously because although I think that sustaining life is not a burden, but it's a cost due to the care cost and the cost of education and the cost of pension schemes. Well, it doesn't come free of charge. How can we sustain this in a society of longevity? I wouldn't say an aging society. I would say a society of longevity. How can we make sure that all this can be kept up? This is the challenge to politics and culture and society. There is not one easy
answer to this. We start with early childhood education, over to good scholar education, school education, so where children can learn really something useful in higher education, moving on to lifelong learning, because once you have higher education, you will never stop learning, even at a higher age. I would say beyond the pension age, or let's call it pension, let's call it the old age phase. So let's put it like this. Once you enter into the final phase or the next phase of your life, how can I contribute in a meaningful way to society? Either by continuing to work, or by a voluntary activity, or by sustaining my own family. All these are factors which can be supported or propped up by politics, and they are doing this, but there is room for improvement. But we must not conjure up fears. We cannot turn the clock back. We need to take along all people, and we need to say it without beating about the bush. Well, that's what we have got. All these things like problematic phenomena like scarcity of skilled workers. Well, you need to take a more differentiated view. We have certain professions, even in the social industry, we have a shifting demand from A to B in. So we need fewer teachers and more caring staff. How can we keep a high level of flexibility? So, because we know that in certain areas there will be a higher need for them, but also a readiness to change. Our ministry is working on all these topics, but not only our ministry, but the federal government must set the framework conditions at a municipal level. The conditions for the life of people are defined, but we need to set the framework conditions. Finally, you mentioned three aspects that are important for the acceptance of democracy. I would raise a fourth point. I would say a functioning government. Functioning government is a very important point, because if you lose trust in government, in the functionality of the state, starting from delays in trains, you said you did not ride your bicycle when you came from, not Frankfurt, but Hanover. If certain things do no longer work, despite our huge number of public officials, that people can no longer rely on the functionality of public administration, that we do not have to wait for such a long time for a permit, then we will create a number of problems, additional problems. And to boot, in one of the wealthiest countries of the planet, Berlin, we are going to discuss this on another panel. Now, what are the levers? Everything you have just said, Mr. Obst, calls upon us to rethink society. Well, let me ask Katharina Spieß, before you start talking about the levers that we can use. And as Mr. Obst told us, there are, on a global level, no real efficient fixes or silver bullets to tackle the demographic change. Let me even double down on this. Elmar Falani has written a very clever book, Children Without Protection, together with Sebastian Sturmeier and Klaus Kurtenbach. He highlights the very dramatic situation in Germany. He describes the boomer cohorts that are entering the pension age, and the next generation that is going to shoulder the responsibility is an utter minority. And the bottom line is they are doing worse than any previous generation. Never before has there been a younger generation that was in such a bad situation. Well, how could we counter this? Well, for example, future councils in some cities have been set up. Politics try to roll out an intergenerational future council. Well, probably this is a good recipe, but sooner or later, in 20 or 30 years, these young people need to accept the load that has been handed down to them. Good approaches. Well, all these are well-known facts, have been well-known facts for a long time. Mr. Obst not only told us that we have known each other for a long time, he talked about a déjà vu. The topic has been on the agenda for a long time. All those approaches are being discussed intensely. So many representatives of academia sitting here in this room again and again. But I think the point is different societies may find different answers. We cannot pretend, well, like in the EU, one size fits all and we find the solution or the answer for all regions. What I want to say, even inside the various countries, you have different regional approaches on how to address this issue. By necessity, different groups, different cultures are living in those regions that are diversely affected. Well, the academics will always say we need to take a more differentiated view. It's a no-brainer. But let's take Germany. Let me start out by mentioning Japan. Japan addresses demographic change quite differently. When we talk about care, in Japan we have a huge acceptance of care robots. Well, there it is possible to use such machinery to address this issue. We know in Germany we do not have this acceptability of robots, so mechanic equipment. We need different approaches. Inside Germany, we have a broad range of regions. The East German regions, the north of Hesse, they are hit by depopulation. Demographic change is totally different from the large aggregations where the birth rates do not go down. There we would need different solutions to address demographic change rather than in the structurally weak regions where we have an excessive aging of the population, which hits very hard. So again, we need to take stock. And to a certain degree, we need to enter the SWOT analysis, looking at the East German municipalities or West Germany, the Vogelsberg region in Hesse. I happen to come from Hesse. It's not only East Germany. Basic services for life. How can we go about this? That these people can no longer anywhere to see a doctor. They have no longer any theaters. We at the BIB, we host, as you might say, a demographic portal of the Federal Republic and the various federal states. We feed anything that we have to provide cultural services. For example, a theater bus or a medical center, a mobile medical service, for example. We shouldn't just be sitting here clueless and repeating, we don't know what to do with demographic change. No, there are many examples. And I think we also need to roll out these paradigmatic examples. We need to address this issue again and again. How can we bring together regions that have similar framework conditions and regions that have very different or opposed conditions? We have talked a lot about the birth rate, but I would say the diagnosis of the problem must be tackled again. Well, please bear with me that I address this again. It's not the case that people do no longer want to have children. Well, yes, the birth rate goes down and the research provides data. The request for the wishes for children goes down. Do people reject the ideas of children altogether, or is it just a fertility gap so that people cannot fulfill their wish to have children? So the political measures needs to take the problem at the root cause. Is it that the people do no longer want to beget children, or is rather the fact that they do not see an opportunity to become parents? And I think here what is really needed is a contribution from science and academia, subjective feeling and mood and objective factors. So not implementing the wish to have children due to fears of the future, economic uncertainties. Yes, global catastrophes, climate change must be taken, yes, economic fears, all those things. Well, these are concerns that people do have, so that stop them from having children.
Yeah, thank you. Jasmin Arbabian-Vogel. Care is always a huge issue, has been mentioned multiple times here already, and you have been focusing on the care sector for decades. On the one hand, we talk about the lack of skilled labor, especially in the care sector. On the other hand, I hear from academics, but also from all kinds of different trades circles here, that people cannot be recruited that easily anymore in other countries. Obviously, we are less appealing than we believe. And this comes back to the issue of democracy, because we have right-wing populism now, and people find this deterring. So obviously, our reputation as an immigration country is not that good anymore. What is your perception? Well, my experience is different. Everything that you have said is true on the one hand. On the other hand, there is a second truth. I would like to remind you of this. Maybe you have seen it, and this is about a year ago. Mr. Lindner was still our finance minister, and he visited Africa, and I think it was Ghana. He went to a university in Ghana, and you can still watch this online. There is a sequence. So he is giving a keynote speech there, and after the speech, he is asking the students, who of you is interested in coming to Germany? And interestingly enough, nobody raised their hand. And then there was some confusion at first. Then there are a few photographers, hey, please raise your hands, dear students, for the nice pictures. And then it happens, 2 or 3 hands are going up. So I agree with you, yes. When it comes to global competition for minds, we are lagging behind. People understand and hear that we have a few issues here in this country with the AfD, with right-wing populism, etc. But there is a second truth. And the second truth is this. We still, and this is the good news, we in Germany are still highly appealing and attractive. We are an attractive country for many people out there. I am an immigrant myself. I was born in Iran, and many parts of populations in Iran would give their lives for living here in Germany, not because we have great dentists or because we have citizens' fees, but because we have a social welfare state and democracy. And this is why we are a very appealing country to many people. This is a huge chance. I mentioned it. I come from Hanover. In terms of soccer, we are in the second league, so we're going through a valley of tears. But sometimes I have the impression that Germany is like a soccer player that gets many good balls, and we don't take the balls. We don't play the balls. We miss opportunities. Let me give you an example. I have 4 companies in Hanover. 2 are care companies. The big care service, I founded in 1996, first intercultural care service. We have 185 staff members, 21 apprentices and trainees. None of them come from Germany, and of the 185 employees, 80% carry a second backpack, so to speak. They have a migration history. Some of them are in Germany or have been in Germany in 3rd or 4th generations, but it's a nice image. They have additional competencies and skills. They are having a second backpack. I like this image. And they also have kids. And what I have experienced with my young staff or the kids of my employees is that they struggle. They are really struggling. Or how do you say this in German? They feel a burden on their shoulders because they have difficulties feeling that they are belonging to the German society. Are they eligible to vote? Well, it depends on whether they have German citizenship or not. And this is an issue for them, you know. And these are all people who graduated from high school here, who who enjoyed an educational system, which, despite all the shortcomings, is still a good educational system. They have difficulties feeling like a member of our society. These are opportunities that we miss. Your pledge for more kids, I can understand this, but kids that were not born today, that I did not give birth to, or we didn't give birth to, will not be the apprentices in 25 years from now. That said, it would be smart if we used the chances that we have already in the country. And now I'm coming to my point. So the diversity of this society is a huge chance. It is something wonderful and positive. And if we saw it like this, it would be a great beginning, wouldn't it? Yes, that would be a totally different political sound in debates. And you got somebody enthusiastically nodding in Sri Lanka. Before you take the floor, I wanted to say one more thing. I mentioned this book earlier, and they also say in this book that parents of the people, of the kids aged 0 to 18, are not eligible to vote. So they are not an interesting community for politicians, thus they don't have a political voice. I think this is a very important finding. It applies to Germany. I don't know what the situation looks like in other countries, but yeah, it is the naturalization or citizenship law issues that are at stake here, and we can see that everything is intertwined. Who feels heard? Who has a voice in this country? But Shalini, Randeria, you were just nodding. Maybe we can also call it participation and demography, not demography and democracy, because participation is obviously also what it comes down to. What positive approaches are there in other European countries? How do other European countries deal with this challenge? Well, before I answer your question, 3 comments that refer to the statements that have just been made. And it also refers to your comment regarding participation. I think political participation for democracy is the most important one. We have so many people in our countries that are not eligible to vote. They are not eligible to vote because they don't have our citizenship. And it is very difficult for them to get our citizenship. I'm not going to share my own experiences with you. After 2.5 years of attempts, I have become German citizen last month. Should we congratulate you? Yes, thank you. I feel very good, but my problem was that I had to give up my Indian citizenship. Since 47 years I have been living in Europe, and I pay taxes in 3 European countries, and I was not eligible to vote. And then eventually I decided to give up my Indian citizenship, which was not easy, emotionally speaking. But anyways, political integration is a very important thing. 1/3 of persons eligible to vote has no voice, and this is a very harmful situation. 22.7% of people living in Austria were born outside of Austria. This is just an example. So we cannot close our eyes to migration. These people are already in the country. And as we have already heard, they speak the language, they work, they pay taxes. Socially and economically, they are integrated, but not politically. And that is a huge problem for our democracies. A second point that I would like to share with you regarding the wish to have children. I don't know how many of you have read the United Nations Family Planning Agency. This is the World Population Report of the United Nations, and it is published every year. I participated in this report this year, and we found, well, we conducted 14,000 interviews in 14 countries globally. So we had countries involved with higher fertility rates than average fertility rate and lower fertility rate. And we also conducted the study across different income levels and brackets. And the answer of the people was really interesting. Most people have fewer kids than they actually want to have. In other words, there's a huge unrealized wish to have children with many people. In Japan, we had a slightly different situation. Women said that because of access to contraceptive, they have more kids than they actually wanted to have. So this unrealized wish to have children applies both to men and to women. And the reason, we ask for the reason, is that people are afraid of the future. That's the most important reason that people mention. Ecological issues have been mentioned less. I mean, there is a small share of people who said, for ecological reason, I feel threatened by climate change, so I don't want to put children into this world. But most people, 60% of respondents mentioned economic reasons, precarious working conditions, difficulties finding a job, making ends meet, unaffordable housing, difficulties when it comes to childcare. And the third reason that was actually interesting, because the question was, what are the approaches in different countries? And you also asked for this. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and China, they are all struggling with gender roles. Many women say two things. First, that they have difficulties finding partners that are willing to assume responsibility for a family and thus for kids. Secondly, the workload. So the work day is so stressful and so long, and requirements are so high that it is extremely stressful for women to master a life with children. So that said, we have not learned about any good models in any of the countries where we interviewed people in terms of how to deal with demographic change in a positive way. And a third point that I would like to briefly mention is this, and then I will come back to your question. Is Germany attractive or not? Now, Germany might be appealing for people that we want to recruit. And for others, Germany is not appealing. Under Chancellor Schröder, we heard about this idea of introducing something like in the United States, and the answer from the CDU was kids instead of Indians. And then we neither had kids nor Indians. To introduce kind of a green card like in the US was the suggestion under Chancellor Schröder. But what is interesting is that we have many, many Indian students that come to Germany. In many Eastern German cities, we have many study programs, many technical study programs where we have Indian students studying. Many study programs would no longer exist if they weren't there. What we have not managed, and I am a German now, so what we have not managed yet is this. We have not managed to have a smooth transition from university to work life. It is difficult, or this transition is so difficult that many people who want to stay here either return to India, also for personal reasons, of course, because families are still in India and it's very difficult to bring the entire family to Germany. In most European countries, you're not allowed to bring your parents here if they get old, but also because the visa situation is so difficult and complex. In other words, apart from the migrants that live here legally anyway, we also have many, many students who we train in Germany free of charge. And then we don't manage to keep them here and integrate them in the labor market, although they would like to stay here, they would like to work here. And I think this is something that we have to tackle and solve. A lot of potential is getting lost because of this. And these are all students that were educated at German universities.
To boot, we have democracy and the lack of flexibility, lack of smoothness that has been addressed for years and years. Now, what about the political implementation? But Mr. Obst, you are free to take the floor once again. Katharina Spieß, and then we will continue here. And then we will also open the questions from the chat. This wonderful example that you mentioned, we do know why certain desires to have children are unfulfilled, and we do far too little to fulfill them, to make these wishes realizable. And questions of reconciliation, many of you will know the daycare for preschool ages, or to roll out a more extensive network of daycare facilities, or to enable also mothers who do not speak German, not yet speak German, to integrate into the labor market. There is a huge potential, especially with women with migration background, with a second backpack. It's not only about those who do not have the German nationality, it's about the increase in gainful employment. But just to give them a first chance for these women, that's why I keep saying the silver bullet is the daycare facilities, because we would reach two objectives in one hit. Well, international students at German universities, this is a highly exciting topic. Being a professor, I realize that the debate, well, yes, in higher education, if you look at the size of those cohorts, oh, what the heck is going on? We have too few students. Every professor wants to hoard together the young recruits, and they even try to find or to attract the students from abroad, because otherwise they would lose their job opportunities. Demographic change in certain areas has led to a situation where there is more attraction for international students in a much more aggressive or active way. International students are sustained and promoted even in other countries. What can we do to keep them? What can we do so that they can establish or make their families? Nationality plays an important role. There are services, even if the citizenship comes, the topic. Mothers, once her child has the German nationality, they would look after the homework, because these mothers say, so I'm going to invest in this child. I'm by training an economist for educational systems. So that's why I can say so. Citizenship does have a measurable impact on the degree to which parents support and sustain their children in doing the homework and in their educational careers. So citizenship has an effect on integration. So again and again, we need to accept life as it is, societal aspects as they are objectively, and to readjust it. But we wanted to hear you. Well, I wanted to highlight a paradoxical situation. We are world champions in making things more complicated, and or also quite often in an absurd way. Germany said, yes, we need skilled workers from other countries. So let's set up a federal agency, it is called Make It in Germany. Well, great name. Well, all good. But jump to this homepage, Make It in Germany. In the download area, there are just 2 charts that you can download. This website is not designed for us. It is aiming at the people out there in other countries. So imagine this, some person sitting in another country, accessing the download area, and they download this chart your way into the German labor market. There is also a counterpart. And also another diagram or chart, your path into the German education market. I have printed them out. These are huge sheets of paper. It looks like a nuclear power station grid. Control grid. It comes with so many what if, so many hypotheses, such a huge amount of intricacies and pitfalls. So it's you lose your bearing. The two of you have addressed this issue. Childcare. I think the federal government, how high this parents' allowance needs to be, could be left altogether if we had excellent daycare facilities. I do not refer to a piano on the ground floor in the kindergarten or Chinese, but it's other things. Quite often it's just the opening hours of the daycare facility. They are not long enough in the day open. Well, it's the fault of politics. They have created a framework legislation. We did have a red-green coalition at the Lower Saxony government, and they said, let's introduce the third caregiver in the daycare facilities. I told these people, well, it sounds good. It's well-intentioned, and you will have nodding of approvals amongst the parents. What if the third caregiver isn't available, is sick, and do we have to shut down the daycare facilities? Yes, they introduced the third person as a caregiver with the simple consequence that if anybody falls sick and goes on holiday, then, well, you will not find a replacement. Then we have daycare facilities that need to shut down. Well, a very good alternative would be, well, why don't we use another way? Well, adjust the realities to the conditions to the reality. Transformation is not our favorite sport here in Germany, but it's necessary, even in such small print. Mr. Obst, do you want to comment on this or that? So much has been said. Well, I would like to follow up on 2 points. On the one hand, well, I am bold enough to say migration cannot be the solution to our demographic problems. We transfer the problems to other countries. We withdraw skilled workers from other countries. We have seen this in Eastern Europe countries, for example, in Poland or other countries in Eastern Europe. These countries, too, do have a demographic problem. We cannot say, let's solve our demographic problems by attracting their young people from other countries, withdrawing and sucking off the well-trained young professionals. This cannot be. So we do not have the silver bullet. We do not have, well, I just mentioned Eastern Europe. I could mention also other countries. All these countries do have a demographic problem too, apart from countries in Africa. If everybody acted like this, it would be a cannibalistic behavior. So it might be a minor tool, but it's not a tool that helps us solving our problems. Well, another approach is better integration of those living here, whether at the beginning we need to grant citizenship. Well, we would need to elaborate on this. What does it mean? What is a nation? What is community? What is one people or one nation? What means integration? Well, there are several ways to purchase, not to purchase, not to buy citizenship. Well, in other countries, you might buy citizenship, but to achieve citizenship through good performance. The other thing, education and daycare facilities or kindergarten, I would say, yes, I've seen all these processes unfolding, leading to the entitlement to a daycare facilities. I come from the GDR. Well, this was the first entitlement that was introduced in 1997. Then we had also for the entitlement for daycare for children age lower than 3 years. And now we have even the legal entitlement to daycare, even at school ages from 6 years onwards. Well, this leads to an ever more increasing entitlement spiral, more and more entitlements, more and more rights to have this. First, we do not have the people to fill these positions. Second, we do not have the financial resources. You mentioned transformation. I would make a plea, yes? Let's be realistic. We must also trim down the expectations towards government, towards the state. What can be afforded? What is financeable? What is doable? What is the utterly necessary? And what are other things that probably we can no longer afford? But no country will die of this. No nation will die of this, as so often. Well, it's essential to have this feeling of togetherness, of community. If the economy is going up again, well, we are not faring very badly in economic. Well, we can also talk about paraphernalia and extra luxury goods, but it's a very, very difficult and cumbersome discussion in politics, especially if you have introduced an entitlement or a right to have this, and to turn the clock back and say, we have got a very big problem at another place, so we need to cut out monies. Well, the St. Florian, the most renowned saint of this country, the saint of the firefighters, please set fire on other houses, not on ours. From the chat, let me pick up a few things. I will read it out. Whoever wants to give a Shalini and Randeria, probably you can give a thought to these fundamental things that any state should provide, framework conditions that are helpful or conducive to this. Probably you can say something to this. The first question, what's the influence of a higher pension age on the capacities for daycare for children, and also the emotional availability, and also the availability or the readiness of the younger people to become parents? What about support by the grandparents? Well, we do have research whether the variation in pensionable age would have an impact on the potential for children's daycare. Well, as a matter of fact, we do know, and this is probably a positive piece of news for the intergenerational cohesion. Almost 1 out of 2 children is to a lower or higher degree also taken care of by grandparents. The question is, well, there are also some doom and gloom notices. Daycare facilities, would they hit hard on the intergenerational cohesion? Far from it, more or less throughout the generations, no matter how good the daycare facilities are or extensive, care given by grandparents is on a constant level. But this is true only for families that have been living here for generations. Quite often, clans, entire extended families that have migrated to Germany show the same picture. If they enter the pensionable age earlier, well, again, we have a gender gap in the care work. Quite often, these are the grandmothers, not the grandparents as such, but the grandmothers or grandparents are quite often more engaged than the fathers. We know it from research, but not on such a regular level. If for women the pensionable age goes up, and if you tell them, please keep working in a full-time job even beyond this threshold, it becomes more and more difficult, because we know that this constant care through the work days is going down. But we also know that families would wish to have a certain relief over the weekends, and many grandmothers would say, well, I would like to work at a 75% workload so that I have 25% of my work day for the grandchildren.
Just one comment on this. I think when it comes to the question of what is the bigger booster, so childcare. So I think the biggest childcare booster is a fair distribution of care work in and amongst the couples. So if men took on more care work, I think that is the biggest lever, because currently we have a great injustice there. 70 to 80% of care work is assumed by women. And then as a proxy, if the woman can't do it because she has to work, then the grandmother should do it. But seriously, the best booster would be if we became a country where the care work was distributed equally amongst the genders. Well, I'm a huge advocate for such a distribution, but I would not play off grandparents against parents. I think we need both. And we know that grandparents support both the fathers and the mothers to come up with a better job-life balance. I don't think it would make sense if we said we don't need the grandparents because fathers have to do it. We don't need the fathers because we have the grandparents. No, both players are necessary. They have to supplement each other. Okay, Mr. Obst, and then we will come to Shalini Randeria. Well, when it comes to elderly people and childcare, well, of course, this is an interesting topic. Has always been, because older people, at least when they are retired, are often considered as a cost factor. So, what is the political situation? An older person is mentioned twice in a political discourse. Firstly, when they retire, because then they cost money. Secondly, when they need care, then they again cost money. And we, in our ministry, try to take a totally different societal approach. First of all, before you retire, or when you retire, and when you then need care, there is a huge time window in between. It comes down to the individual. We have had quite a few fit grandparents, yeah. So the time window is really huge between retirement age and the year when you need care. So people sort of disappear from the political radar, but what they do is they take care of grandchildren. And this is a cost factor. Calculations vary, but the German Institute for Age Issues said that it is between 19 and 30 billion euros in terms of services that are rendered by grandparents in the area of childcare. This is a cost factor that is really relevant. You were talking about economics. So this is something that has to be considered. And you, of course, work as grandparents when you're not in need of care yourself. So we are a society that has to really think about the question of, do we have to work longer or not? I will also be confronted with this challenge. I probably also want to work longer, and I will probably work longer than pensionable age. It is a normal question, and if I'm still fit and healthy, then I will do this. There are many rules that try to prevent this. We have to maybe overcome them, but this is not compulsion. It is not a must. It is an offer. And we should take this seriously, because otherwise the costs that will incur because of the share of people who are pensioners will squeeze us. I mean, I know the numbers. I know the figures in our budget. We just have to have a very honest discussion. And we once had a discussion. Pensionable age 67. I mean, we have seen a process of about 10, 15 years where this was discussed. And then we eventually arrived at 67 as pensionable age. But whether this really results in grandparents that are no longer able to take care of their grandchildren is an individual decision of people themselves, especially when it comes to voluntariness in the area of childcare. There will always be people who say, this is very important to me. And I don't think that there would be a huge breakdown, but we have to face this discussion and challenge. But there are there will be fewer and fewer grandchildren. So you also have to mention this. Even if we have a higher pensionable age, we still have a long, healthy period. And the voluntary work of pensioners can be very important for a democracy. So you said that you do not go from retirement to the need for care. You can also work as a volunteer as a pensioner, and this can be a chance for an aging society, because this is a huge potential that can be tapped, this potential of elderly people. Yeah, there are wonderful model projects, intergenerational houses, etc. Yeah, we have wonderful models for almost everything, but here we are discussing what we want to roll out across the country, and this is sometimes missing as a discussion. Yeah, thank you very much for mentioning democracy again, because I would like to come back to Shalini Randeria. Here's my question for you. What fundamental things does a government have to provide for a functioning democracy? What does the government have to organize for its citizens? Well, all conditions and requirements have already been mentioned multiple times. Childcare is indispensable. Like has already been said, it is not about ideal standards. No, we are talking regular services, childcare. It is absolutely necessary, especially for young families. And if we want that both mothers and fathers work and have a good work-life balance, then we need to discuss this. Housing, of course, is a huge issue as well. Affordable housing. This is something that the government definitely has to provide and guarantee. Flexible work and labor. Next point. So we're not talking precarious working conditions. Good working conditions. And also in terms of time, we need flexible work schemes. Working from home, other models, also that you can work at different phases through your career and that you can work less than 40 hours a week. And then if the kids are grown up, you can work more again. This is something that has to be regulated by the government. And employers also have to make a contribution to this and participate. What is very important, well, we talked about retirement and pensions already, but I think that Frau Vogel is absolutely right when she says that we need equitable distribution of care work and household work. What we have seen, and let me give you an Austrian example again. I have been living in Austria for 10 years. The FPÖ, during the last election campaign, got very strong, and they got 30% of votes in the last elections. And one of the most important points during the election campaign was a so-called head premium. So women back to the stove, take care of children. So in other words, we do not only see progressive women's movements, but we see a huge setback in terms of women's rights and the image of women and in terms of gender equality within families. This is what we have seen in the last years because of the shift to right-wing populism. Digital things play a huge role in this context. You know, the respective discussions on social media. And I think there's another important point, because you wanted to come back to democracy. Now, a democracy, I'm a social anthropologist and sociologist by trade. Democracy does not end just in liberal democratic institutions. It requires liberal norms. It requires norms, equality, respect, tolerance, that is. And they have to be exercised first and foremost in people's homes. So democracy is not a way of life. It's not just embedded in political institutions, but also in families. So socialization in families at home plays a huge role, especially when it comes to attitudes towards democracy. And I think we definitely have to start there. We have to focus on homes and also on schools. The earlier, the better. So in other words, it is about thinking of how democracy can be experienced, can be lived. What are the public spaces that a diverse society can use to also tackle differences in a constructive manner? Privatization of such spaces is the exact opposite to this. Thank you very much. This basically also leads to the following English question. Let me shorten it a bit. It's a long question.
Talk about the accountability of social institutions like education systems, workplaces, and local or national government bureaus to the desires and needs of individual citizens rather than the responsibility of citizens to reproduce the nation. Das ging schon so ein bisschen.
This basically went into a similar direction. It is about talking about structures and not about the individual in society which is held responsible for reproduction. It's this give and take, basically. Okay, I would like to remind you, dear audience, of the fact that you can also participate in our discussion here. Maybe somebody wants to ask a question or make a comment. We have a roving mic. You can ask questions both in German and in English. Obviously, this is not the case. Okay, but maybe we can answer the English question. I mean, we talked a lot about framework conditions here. Which framework conditions have to be there so that individual decisions can be made? It's a pity that I can't talk to the person that asked the question directly. What can family, what can educational policy, what can citizen law do? What can they contribute to making sure that people can contribute? What can the government do so that people, for instance, stay healthy as long as possible? We haven't discussed this at all. If we have a high share of elderly people, then this implies that we need to invest more in prevention. What do we do for lifelong learning? What do we do for further education? I mean, this all pays into the system. Demographic change at the end of the day is based on certain framework conditions. Do we invest in sickness? Do we invest in health? Do we invest in how we can make people healthy again, or do we prevent certain diseases from breaking out? I think this is an extremely important approach. We haven't discussed it at all as yet, although in an aging society, these questions definitely have to be addressed. Yes, urban versus rural structures, infrastructures, services of general interest. This is what it comes down to. So we come back to similar points over and over again, but it is a very vast issue. For time reasons, I would like to come back to the question of what intergenerational contracts are possible today. Should we rethink them? Because obviously they are not working that well anymore. Mr. Obst, what are your thoughts on this? Well, my department, will exist as of the 1st of November. Now it is a department that still has a different title. So it will have the title Intergenerational Justice. I have issues with this term because it is more important to talk about commonalities in our society. What is justice? Justice depends on the perspective of people. I mean, everybody associates something different with justice. Young people see justice differently than an elderly person. They have totally different viewpoints. So here's my point. First of all, we need to define what connects us. I used the image of the boat earlier. where you have people sit in different ends of the boat. Whether you sit in front or in the rear part doesn't matter. So we have kids, adolescents in the boat. Then we have the medium-aged people. And by the way, they are the ones that have to bear the biggest burden. They have to raise their kids. They have to work and create assets. And they also have to do care work. They have to take care of relatives or parents. And by the way, this is the group that bears the greatest burden. And we have elderly people that have performed, that have worked, and they said that, and they say that now that I have worked, now that I have retired, I am entitled to receive something. And this needs to be balanced off. The different interests have to be balanced off. We talked about participation earlier. Of course, it comes down to participation, especially of young people. They have to be integrated more into political processes. We talked about this question earlier. So, will politicians make resolutions to then pass more burdens on the younger generations? This is what we hear very often. So where can we equalize the different interests? And then working longer is one option, as I said earlier. Also for the older generation, they can contribute by working as volunteers, by staying engaged and involved. So at a time where they have retired from their work, they can give something back to their society. And then the readiness to say, yes, we have a problem in terms of how to deal with demographic change. And we have to be honest and say that this is a permanent problem and will be a permanent problem. So kids that are kids today will have kids later, and they will be confronted with the same challenge. So we have to make sure that our society can master these challenges. We have to equalize the different interests. We have to balance off the different interests. I mean, the discussion is not totally new. I have implemented similar projects already in the 1990s. By the way, I didn't focus on specific projects today because the federal ministries and government, they just kick off certain things, but they don't determine the lives of people. And we talked about generations and intergenerational justice already in the 1990s. So this is something that has been intensively discussed for more than 30 years. The right approach is that we accept that we are all sitting in the same boat. We all have to support each other. And if this is our foundation, then we will find common solutions.
So let's ask here the audience, please. What would you say, Jasmin Arbabian-Vogel, sustainability? What would it mean if we have a working intergenerational contract? First, let me also follow up on what Mr. Obst said. What I liked about your statement is that you said you are having problems with the term of justice. I agree, because I do have problems too. I have been living in Germany since 1986. I'm a social democrat. Let me out myself. And I am going through this discussion from a variety of perspectives. As a member of the party that claims that social justice is the core brand, well, but no, I would say it's one of the problems that justice is always defined from a perspective that is comparative. Is it just or fair that somebody earns 680 euros as the basic income, while anybody else who works more has a lower income? Is it just that somebody shoulders the burden for anybody else? So it's always a mathematical conundrum that will lead also to a reconciliation of interests. But if we want to have a good society, in a good society, people would not compare each other with all the entitlements, but justice or fairness that you perceive. When they say, I think that we have a fair or an equitable society, it would reflect the feeling that the the environment in which I'm living, it's okay because I have affordable housing. I can send my kids to school. So then I would be able to do without this constant comparing. And our discussion here, what she said, well, I would add to this by two things. First, well, affordable care. Affordable care, well, we do have a problem in Germany because after the introduction of this duty to adhere to the collective agreements, well, this topic has been pushed aside. Care is no longer affordable. Well, we have 3,000 euros of extra payments. You have to chip in 3,000 euros per month from your private income. So it will be on amounts for a certain amount of time, which is a bad piece of news. So the other point that I need to add, which is the major point, which is also the binding force for everything. We must achieve it, that we bring people into work, gainful employment. If we achieve this, we can do without so many other necessities. People that can sustain themselves, that can earn their own living, well, and people want it. Very few would say, well, I loathe work. No. The huge majority wants to work. That must be our overarching objective. We need totally different tools than the ones we are using today. We need a different style of politics. We need to, for example, asylum seekers that are on the waiting list for such a long time. We need a different type of job center or a labor agency, what we call Kümmeragentur, agency of caregivers. What is needed to bring people into gainful employment? That will be the main task, because we have this preposterous situation. We have so many vacant posts, unfilled posts, and vacant laborers posts, and then we have so many people idling around. If a Martian would Earth here would say, "Hey, are you nuts? You have so many people that are sitting idle around the pond." But, well, times have changed. Times have never been better. We would have solved so many problems if we had finally solved this conundrum. Let's listen to Shalini Randeria. What would you say? What should be included in this generational contract, given the conditions we are having today? Well, I think you have said it already, what the intergeneration contract needs. In this constitution, or in this form, it comes from a different demographic structure. I think it's an illusion that it can be extended just like that. Another point that is close to my heart. This is one of the questions that we have seen in the NBA reports. That's the reason for which people have the desire to have children. And most of the respondents said, children are an element of joy in your life. For so many, well, it's a huge, well, how shall I put it? It's not a sacrifice. It's not a sacrifice. It is a sacrifice that they cannot fulfill their desire to have children. Well, I think you were right in pointing out that we cannot solve the problems of the children that we have not given birth to. So, but I think there are ways we can contribute to a higher number of children once we get the framework conditions right. Many of these conditions are defined by the government or by social accountability of institutions. This question, well, family is an institution. The family is a social institution. And the big question is, how can you make life easier for young families just in this critical phase when they have little children, how to reconcile work and family. Because if they spend more time with children, they will all suffer income losses. Well, if you want to have intergenerational justice, you must compensate for this loss. Well, one proposal that has been made repeatedly was that parents with children would have more votes to cast. So they would have more voting rights also on behalf of their children. They would be given a vote. And there was another proposal, a council, where younger people can also become participants in decision-making, political decision-making. We need to have more inclusive decision-making routes. Instead, to take decisions on behalf of the children, to involve them in the decision-making process. Last point, well, it hovered around my head. I think one of the problem is what I call demographic imagination. It's not about the ideal number of how many immigrants or mothers do we have in our country, because there is such a huge load of disinformation hovering around the heads of the people. So it's a totally distorted perception of reality that has taken place, of the truth. The surveys in all European countries, both in the east and the west of Europe, if you ask people, what do you think? What would you guess the number of the immigrants in their perception is a multiple of the actual number of immigrants. So much political education is needed to get this right. This demographic panic must be blown away from the heads and minds of people. And those fears that are triggered conscientiously, well, they become also, they are then attributed to the refugees and to asylum seekers. So it's just a distorted perspective created by a misleading austerity policy. Thank you very much for this very important contribution. Let me wrap it up in Q&A. Well, it's again about all the necessary signals of appreciation are curtailed. Families with many children are double losers because first they educate and raise more children but renounce a substantial part of income. Then there is a family is such an enriching experience in the best of hypotheses. Well, they learn early on the democracy. With Katharina Spieß, please bring this. Well, one last point. We must also say, reading the poverty report on Germany, a high number of children is one of the contributing factors for poverty. That's why children live in poverty. A high number of, we must not embellish this fact. We cannot say that families with many children can provide enough living means. We have discussed so much about families with children. Family is quite often conceived differently. We have so many plural forms of family, from the single parent down to the patchwork family. For the demographic debate is very important. Andreas Edel said it right. So inside the pyramid, inside the population pyramid, so much is happening. What I wanted to say about the intergenerational contract, what has not been stated yet, among those many things that I would love to repeat, I think it is utterly important to take a look at the way in which the older generations reflect on offering better daycare facilities. The older generation, are you for or against more daycare facilities? There is an overwhelming majority in favor of more daycare facilities. So we must not oppose one generation against the other. As a matter of fact, the elderly, the senior generation feels great sympathy for the welfare of young people. And therefore, I think it is so important when we talk about new debts and higher degree of indebtedness, and the future generation needs to carry all those new debts, which is true on the one hand. On the other hand, you need to consider so many investments. It's not just consumptive spending, it's also real investment, real expenditure. So who is carrying the burden? Well, it's a necessary discussion. Events like this, well, you impose this duty to say conclusion here. I think the discussion with each other is so important, not pitting one against the other. Thank you very much, Katharina Spieß, Jasmin Arbabian-Vogel, and thank you very much. I'm seeing you are very impatient. So the intergenerational contract was the final round, and a crisp, conclusive word? Yes, you're welcome. Okay. Thank you very much for your wise words. Let me add one thing to this. I believe the conditions as they are what they are because we have become accustomed that the same people keep discussing about the same things. We know each other. We are more or less the same age, but it's all bullshit. We should talk to migrants when it's about intergenerational contracts. It would be a good thing to have younger people on the panel here. I think, let me make a plea for an opening up to more diversity and also in view of the various panelists. We know participation is the magic trick. It's not just an conceptual participation, but also factual participation. When it comes to discussions like this one here, well, I see, we need to reflect critically about our own structures. Jasmin Arbabian-Vogel, thank you very much. Thanks to Sven-Olaf Obst and also to Shalini Randeria. Thank you very much for your participation and enjoy a good night's sleep. Thank you very much for your interest. Thank you to the chat. I think at least we have touched upon all the relevant questions. I hand over to the award ceremony of the European Demographer Award to Emilio Zacchini. Please stay cool, stay healthy. Bye-bye.
All right. Dear colleagues, dear friends of demography, dear friends of science, my name is Emilio Zacchini, and I am director at the Max Planck Institute for Demography Research in Rostock. But today I'm here in my role as president of the European Association of Population Studies, or IPS. Because of this role in the association, I had the honor of serving as chair of the selection committee for the European Demographer Award this year. And tonight, I have the great pleasure of presenting the awards. The award is organized by Population Europe, the network of leading demographic centers in Europe, and has been generously supported by the Stifterverband and Förderfonds Wissenschaft in Berlin. The European Demographer Award has just turned 10 years old. The first awards were presented in 2015, and over the years have recognized outstanding research on the causes and consequences of demographic change in Europe and beyond. Across Europe today, we face profound demographic shifts that touch every aspect of our societies. Populations are aging, fertility rates remain low, and migration has become the main source of population change across many, many regions. These changes are reshaping our economies, our communities, as well as political behavior. Rural areas are losing young people to cities, health inequalities are widening, and questions of integration and intergenerational fairness have never been more pressing. This year's laureates of the European Demography Award remind us in different ways that scientific measurement and understanding of population change is key in order to be prepared for the demographic challenges ahead and to transform them into opportunities. Now, the European Demography Award includes two prize groups. One award goes to promising and upcoming researchers who obtained their PhD between 2019 and 2024. And one award goes to more experienced scientists who received their PhD between 2009 and 2014. The selection committee had a very difficult task of choosing the laureates this year. It was so hard that in the end, we made the recommendation to present two awardees for the category of promising and upcoming researchers. I take this as a good sign for the future of demography as a discipline and as an indication of the strength of the community of demographers. Dear friends of demography, there are many paths that lead young researchers to the study of demographic change. I myself became interested in population studies because I met a demographer who was not only an excellent scientist, but also a great mentor and an engaging teacher, someone with contagious enthusiasm for the study of population dynamics, and someone who highlighted the importance of demography research for our society, also by engaging with the public, with policy makers, and with national statistical offices. These traits are also shared by all of this year's laureates. I'm confident that they will continue to be a source of inspiration and encouragement for many students and mentees in the future. All of the laureates for this year also have stellar CVs and an outstanding track record in terms of scientific productivity and the quality of research. I'm not going to go into the details of their CVs. Instead, I will provide a brief introduction into the research. I will start by announcing the winners of the category Promising and Upcoming Researcher. The first laureate is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Helsinki. In her research, among others, she has examined the decline in fertility in Nordic countries since 2010. The common expectation among demographers was that fertility decline in Nordic countries was driven mainly by women delaying childbearing. She showed that that was not the case. Women have also been having fewer children overall. In particular, she has linked fertility and fertility decline to economic uncertainty and labor market conditions. Her work has challenged the assumption that societies with high gender equality and family-friendly policies, like the ones of Nordic countries, automatically maintain higher levels of fertility. In particular, her research suggests that the lack of secure and well-established career paths may play a bigger role for childbearing than the challenges of balancing an established career with family formation. Methodologically, she has leveraged the power of cohort analysis and demographic forecasting in order to make predictions for the future. Now, the first European Demographer Award goes to Dr. Julia Hellstrand.
The Berlin Demography Days. Let me do this in English.
Förderfonds Wissenschaft in Berlin, in cooperation with Population Europe and the Berlin Demography Days, honors Dr. Julia Hellstrand for her outstanding research in the field of population studies on demographic change in Europe in the award category A Promising and Upcoming Researcher who has obtained her PhD within the period of 2019 to 2024, Berlin, 27th of October 2025. Congratulations.
Now, you can stay. Now, remember that we have a tie with 2 awards for the category of promising and upcoming researcher. This award also goes to a scientist who is assistant professor at the University of Southern Denmark. He has been working primarily on health, mortality, and inequality in aging populations. Among others, he investigates how longevity and life expectancy vary across social groups. His research highlights the gains in life expectancy and healthy life expectancy at older ages are uneven, and that commonly held assumptions about average trends may mask very deep disparities. By focusing on the experience of older age groups, including retirement, health decline, and mortality, his work connects demography directly with social policy for aspects like pensions, healthcare, and various types of inequalities. His scholarship helps bridge demographic analysis with pressing societal questions. He measured, for example, who benefits and who doesn't from increases in lifespan. More broadly, his work addresses how aging society should plan for intergenerational fairness and not only for longevity. So the second European Demographer Award goes to Dr. Cosmo Strozza.
So let me read the second document. The Förderfonds Wissenschaft in Berlin, in cooperation with Population Europe and the Berlin Demography Days, honors Dr. Cosmo Strozza for his outstanding research in the field of population studies on demographic change in Europe, a award category for a promising and upcoming researcher who has obtained their PhD within the period of 2019, and now I have to switch, 2024, Berlin, 27th of October, 2025.
Now, we move to the second category of this award. This one is for a more senior scientist. The laureate for this category is a professor at the University of Vienna. She is widely recognized for her influential research on fertility and family change in low fertility European countries, with a strong focus on later childbearing, postponement of first births, and how partnership dynamics and education are linked to fertility outcomes. Her work studies how dissolution, repartnering, and cohabitation, as well as marriage patterns more broadly, influence when and how people have children, when and how many children people have, essentially. She has examined the trend of postponing childbearing in developed countries, and the circumstances in which people in their late 30s and early 40s have children. She has also studied the impact of delayed childbearing on childlessness and completed fertility. Among others, she documented how the age at first birth has risen and how this affects fertility outcomes across Europe. She has looked at how high educational attainment, fertility intentions, and childlessness interact. And she has done that across a number of cohorts and across a number of countries. For example, she found that increases in educational attainment explain only part of changes in childlessness trends. Her research often uses core data spanning decades and multiple countries to analyze how fertility behaviors evolve over time and what factors drive them. Her findings help clarify why fertility remains low in many European countries, despite strong welfare and family policy frameworks. By focusing on when people form families, how partnerships decisions evolve, and the role of education and context, she helps bridge micro-level behavior with macro-level demography. Her work shows that when people partner and when they choose to have their first child, or whether they ever do, are shaped not just by policy or welfare provisions, but also by evolving life course dynamics, education, partnerships, and the timing of events over the life course. So the European Demographer Award for the category of a more experienced researcher goes to Professor Eva Bourgeois.
The Fördervorwissenschaft in Berlin, in cooperation with Population Europe and the Berlin Demography Days, honors Professor Dr. Eva Bourgeois for her outstanding research in the field of population studies on demographic change in Europe in the award category for a more experienced researcher who has obtained their PhD within the period of 2009 to 2014, Berlin, 27th of October 2025. Okay. Ja, dann nehme ich einfach dieses Mikro.
So I'll grab this microphone. Thank you so much. I think this has been a wonderful day with a very brilliant and with a wonderful panel discussion. Thank you very much, Shelley Kupferberg, for moderating this in such an egregious way. And thank you to all of you for being with us, for participating here. I hope you have taken inspiration from this evening. I have received so much inspirational force. We will continue this discourse about demography. Europe is worth it. Germany is worth it. Now to a totally different section of this event. We have a reception on the first floor up there. Once again, you can talk to the awardees and enjoy the further discussions. And I wish you an entertaining evening. Thank you very much for coming.